Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Islamic Economics Series. Today we're going to tackle one of the biggest economic questions of our time. What is artificial intelligence really going to do to the job market? We're going to move past all the hype and the headlines to look at a really solid framework for understanding this massive shift and, the huge policy questions that come along with it.
So just how big of a deal are we talking about here? Well, this quote from the McKinsey Global Institute really puts it into perspective. And look, this isn't just hyperbole, it's a serious forecast about the sheer speed and scale of this thing. I mean, think about it. The Industrial Revolution completely reshaped our world over generations. AI is on a path to do something similar, but in a tiny fraction of that time.
Now, you've probably heard the argument before, right? That technology has always destroyed some jobs, but it ends up creating more in the long run. And historically, yeah, that's been true. But the really critical question we have to ask today is AI a fundamental break from that pattern? The key difference, and this is so important, is that we're not just making physical labor more efficient anymore. We're now automating cognitive tasks, things that used to be exclusively for human minds.
And to really get our heads around this shift, our old economic models, well, they just don't cut it. They tend to look at technology as this simple tool that just makes workers better at their jobs. But what happens when the technology doesn't just help the worker? What happens when it replaces them completely? That's the crucial distinction. AI isn't just augmenting human labor, it can be a substitute for it. So we need a new way of looking at this, one that focuses on specific tasks, not just on labor as one big blob.
And this is exactly where the work of economists Daron Acemoglu and Pascal Restrepo is so important. They've given us a much more detailed, task-based framework that lets us see this push and pull of technology on the job market with way more clarity.
Okay, so their framework really boils it down to three competing forces, kind of like a tug-of-war. First, you've got the displacement effect. That's the easy one to see. It's the robot taking over a task, plain and simple. But that's not the whole picture. When automation makes things cheaper, you get a productivity effect. Lower prices can boost demand for stuff across the whole economy, and that can create a need for more workers in other places. And then finally, there's the reinstatement effect. This is where technology creates brand new jobs, totally new tasks for humans that just didn't exist before. The entire fate of the labor market, really, it just hangs in the balance between these three forces.
So, which one of these forces is winning the tug-of-war? Well, the data from the last 30 years is pretty darn clear. The displacement effect has been running way ahead of the reinstatement effect. What this tells us is that we're getting incredibly good at automating the tasks humans already do, but we are not creating new, complex tasks for people at anywhere near the same speed. And that imbalance, that's the real heart of the problem.
And this imbalance, it explains a huge puzzle in modern economics. See, for decades, as the economy got more productive, labor's share of the income grew right alongside it. But look at what happens right around the year 2000. Productivity keeps climbing up, but the demand for labor just flatlines. This is the great decoupling. The economic pie is getting bigger, for sure, but workers are getting a smaller and smaller slice. Why? Because the very nature of what we produce is shifting away from tasks done by people.
So this brings us to the first big policy idea that you hear all the time. It seems intuitive, right? If old skills are becoming obsolete, well, let's just teach workers new skills. But is it really that simple? Is that a sufficient solution?
Now, while retraining sounds great, and it's definitely part of any strategy, relying on it as the main solution, well, that presents a much more complicated picture. The track record for these big, public retraining programs is, to put it mildly, mixed.
The actual evidence for these large-scale retraining programs is pretty sobering. I mean, we have decades of research on major initiatives in the US, and they show little to no significant impact on people's long-term earnings. Get this, one study actually found that some retrained workers earned less than their peers who didn't retrain, maybe because they lost valuable time out of the workforce. It really makes you ask a critical question. What's the point of retraining someone if we're just setting them up for the next job that's about to be put on the automation chopping block?
Okay, so given the limits of retraining, the conversation is really starting to shift toward more fundamental changes in how our economy is structured. If we can't solve the problem just by focusing on the supply of labor, the workers, maybe we need to look at the other side, at the demand, and the underlying incentives that are pushing automation so hard in the first place.
This right here, this gets to the heart of a massive distortion in our economy. Our tax code is fundamentally biased. When a company hires a human being, it pays a whole bunch of payroll taxes. But when it invests in a robot or an AI system to do the exact same job, it not only avoids all those taxes, but it gets to write off the investment with deductions. The system is actively, even if it's unintentional, it's subsidizing machines over people.
This imbalance has led to some interesting proposals, like an automation tax. Now, the goal here isn't to punish technology or stop progress. It's about leveling the playing field. This could mean getting rid of some of those tax perks for capital investments that displace workers, or maybe creating a new tax that kind of mirrors the payroll taxes that we already have. The point is to make sure that as the economy automates, the public tax base that funds everything, our social infrastructure, doesn't just disappear.
But what if rebalancing the tax incentives just isn't enough? What if automation keeps displacing workers faster than we can create new tasks for them? If that's the case, we have to start confronting a much more radical idea. What if we need to weaken the link between having a job and having the right to survive?
And that brings us to Universal Basic Income, or UBI. Think of it as a floor, not a ceiling. The idea is to give a regular, unconditional payment to every single citizen, making sure everyone has a basic level of economic security, no matter what their employment status is. It's an idea that's gaining a lot of traction as a potential way to decouple survival from work, in an economy where those stable, long-term jobs might just become a thing of the past.
And while no country has a full-blown UBI system just yet, this idea has really moved from science fiction to actual practice. There are pilot programs running all over the world, from villages in India to major cities in the United States, all gathering real-world data. Now, the results are still being debated, of course, but these experiments are giving us the very first pieces of concrete evidence for how a policy like this might actually play out in the real world.
And all of this, it forces us to ask a final, really provocative question. For centuries, we have built our entire societies around work being the main source of income, of purpose, of dignity. If advanced AI starts to pull that foundation out from under us, we're not just going to need new economic policies, we might need a whole new social contract. What does a meaningful life even look like when human labor is no longer the central pillar of our economy? That is maybe the most important question we'll have to answer in this century. See you in the next one. Subscribe, like, and comment.